In many American prison systems, there are cells where the door does not open for movement, only for control. These units are commonly known as solitary confinement, administrative segregation, or restrictive housing. In facilities operated by the Federal Bureau of Prisons and across multiple state systems, individuals can be held in isolation for 22 to 24 hours a day. The design is deliberate. Movement is limited. Interaction is minimized. Time is controlled. Meals are passed through a slot. Communication is reduced to brief exchanges with correctional staff. Recreation, when permitted, often takes place alone in a separate enclosure, sometimes referred to in official records as a recreation cage. There is no physical contact. In some documented cases, individuals have spent years under these conditions. Reports by the United Nations have noted that prolonged solitary confinement, defined as more than 15 consecutive days, can lead to irreversible psychological effects. These observations are not theoretical. They are based on medical reviews, prison records, and direct interviews with incarcerated individuals. In the United States, tens of thousands of people are held in some form of restrictive housing at any given time, according to data compiled by organizations such as the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The reasons vary. Some are placed there for disciplinary violations. Others are held for their own protection. Some are under investigation. And some are simply waiting. Waiting for transfer. Waiting for court proceedings. Waiting for decisions that may take months or years. Time behaves differently in these spaces. There are no natural markers of day or night. Artificial light replaces sunlight. Silence replaces conversation. The absence of external reference points can disrupt basic cognitive functions. Peer-reviewed studies published in journals such as the American Journal of Public Health have documented symptoms including anxiety, hallucinations, memory loss, and difficulty concentrating. These effects are not universal, but they are consistently reported across different institutions and time periods. Correctional policies recognize these risks. Some states have introduced limits on the duration of solitary confinement. Others have implemented step-down programs designed to transition individuals back into general population. But the practice remains in use. It exists within the framework of institutional control. And within that framework, uncertainty is constant. For individuals connected to unresolved criminal cases, that uncertainty takes on a different dimension. Across the United States, there are thousands of homicide investigations that remain open. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, clearance rates for homicide cases have declined over the past several decades. In some jurisdictions, more than one-third of murder cases go unsolved. These are not abstract numbers. They represent real events, documented in police reports, court filings, and investigative records. They represent victims whose cases remain active. They represent families who continue to wait for answers. And in some instances, they intersect with the prison system in complex ways. There are individuals currently incarcerated for unrelated offenses who are considered persons of interest in unsolved cases. There are inmates who have provided information, sometimes credible, sometimes not, about crimes that have never been resolved. There are also cases where convictions have been overturned, raising questions about whether the actual perpetrator was ever identified. These situations are documented in legal appeals, investigative journalism, and post-conviction reviews. Inside correctional facilities, information moves differently. It is filtered through institutional processes. Statements are recorded. Interviews are conducted. But verification is slow, and in many cases incomplete. For investigators, access to incarcerated individuals requires coordination, authorization, and documentation. For inmates, providing information can carry consequences, both formal and informal. The environment does not encourage open disclosure. It regulates it. This is the context in which some of America's most persistent unsolved cases continue to exist. Not outside the system, but partially within it. There are documented instances where cold cases have been revisited years later, based on new testimony from incarcerated individuals. Some of these leads have resulted in arrests. Others have not. In many cases, the information cannot be corroborated. Records are incomplete. Memories degrade. Witnesses disappear. And time continues to pass. Back in the cell, the conditions remain unchanged. The light stays on. The door stays closed. The routine continues. For those inside, the passage of time is measured not by events but by repetition. Meals, counts, silence. And for some, the knowledge that outside these walls, there are questions that remain unanswered. Questions that may never be resolved. Not because they lack importance, but because the systems designed to address them are limited by time, evidence, and human memory. In official records, these cases are classified as open, active, pending. But in practice, many remain suspended, existing in a space between documentation and resolution, much like the individuals confined within these cells, waiting, without a clear endpoint, without a defined outcome, only the continuation of process, and the absence of closure. In law enforcement systems across the United States, an unsolved case does not disappear. It is assigned a status: open, active, cold. The terminology varies by jurisdiction, but the meaning is consistent. The investigation remains unresolved. In departments such as the Los Angeles Police Department and the New York Police Department, case files are preserved long after initial investigative activity has slowed. These records include incident reports, witness statements, forensic analyses, and evidence logs. They are maintained in both physical and digital formats. Some are revisited regularly. Others are accessed only when new information emerges. The scale is measurable. According to data compiled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the national homicide clearance rate has declined from approximately 90% in the 1960s to closer to 50 to 60% in recent years. This means that each year, a significant number of homicide cases remain unresolved. The reasons are documented. In some cases, there is insufficient physical evidence. In others, witnesses are unavailable, unwilling, or inconsistent. Technological limitations at the time of the original investigation can also affect outcomes. Evidence collected decades ago may not meet current forensic standards. And in certain instances, investigative errors have been identified through later review. To address this, many departments have established specialized cold case units. These units operate with a specific mandate: to re-examine unsolved cases using updated methods. This includes advances in DNA analysis, digital forensics, and data cross-referencing. In 2020, the Bureau of Justice Assistance reported that jurisdictions receiving federal support for cold case work were able to reopen and actively investigate cases that had remained dormant for years. Some resulted in arrest. Others clarified previously unknown details. But not all produced definitive outcomes. The process is methodical. Files are reviewed line by line. Evidence is retested when possible. Witnesses are re-interviewed if they can be located. Each step is documented. Each decision is recorded. There is no guarantee of resolution. One of the most significant developments in recent decades has been the use of forensic genealogy. This method involves comparing DNA evidence from crime scenes with publicly available genetic databases to identify potential relatives of an unknown suspect. The approach gained national attention during the identification of a suspect in the Golden State Killer investigation. According to court records and investigative reporting, this method allowed law enforcement to narrow down potential suspects through family lineage analysis. The case demonstrated the potential of combining traditional investigative work with emerging technology. However, the application of these methods is not universal. Access to resources varies by jurisdiction. Some departments have dedicated forensic laboratories and specialized personnel. Others rely on external agencies or federal assistance. Budget constraints, staffing limitations, and case volume all influence how and when a case can be revisited. There are also legal considerations. Evidence must be handled according to strict chain of custody protocols. New investigative techniques must comply with existing laws regarding privacy and admissibility. In some instances, evidence has been lost, degraded, or improperly stored. These factors can limit the scope of reinvestigation. For families of victims, the existence of an open case does not necessarily mean active progress. Public records and interviews documented by organizations such as the National Institute of Justice indicate that communication between investigators and families can be infrequent, particularly in older cases. Updates may occur only when there is a significant development. In the absence of new information, the status remains unchanged. Within correctional facilities, these unresolved cases can intersect with ongoing investigations. Inmates may be interviewed by detectives working on cold cases. These interviews are recorded and documented. Some lead to actionable information. Others do not. The reliability of such statements is assessed through corroboration with existing evidence. Institutional procedures govern how these interactions take place. Requests for interviews must be approved. Security protocols are enforced. Legal representation may be involved depending on the context. Each step is formalized. Each interaction becomes part of the record. There are documented cases where incarcerated individuals have confessed to crimes years after they occurred. In some instances, these confessions have been verified through physical evidence or independent corroboration. In others, they have been determined to be unreliable. Motivations for providing information can vary, and investigators are trained to evaluate credibility based on verifiable facts. The files reflect this complexity. They contain leads that were pursued and those that were not. They document decisions made under specific conditions, with the information available at the time. They are not static, but they do not resolve themselves. Each unsolved case represents a sequence of documented actions. Reports written, evidence collected, interviews conducted, and at some point a pause. Not an ending. Pause. Back in the records room, the files remain organized, cataloged, and accessible. They are part of an active system. But their status reflects an absence. An absence of conclusion. An absence of certainty. And in many cases, an absence of identifiable accountability. The process continues when new information becomes available. Until then, the files remain where they are. Maintained, preserved, and unresolved. Evidence that waits. Physical evidence does not change, but the ability to interpret it does. In forensic laboratories across the United States, items collected years or even decades earlier are stored under controlled conditions. Each piece is cataloged, labeled, and preserved according to strict procedural standards. This includes biological samples, trace materials, and objects recovered from crime scenes. The purpose is continuity. Evidence must remain intact in case future analysis becomes possible. Standards for handling and preservation are guided by agencies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation and accredited through bodies like the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors. These protocols define how evidence is collected, packaged, transported, and stored. Each transfer is documented. Each access is recorded. This documentation is known as the chain of custody. It is essential for maintaining the integrity of the evidence in court proceedings. In older cases, the condition of evidence varies. Some materials have been preserved under optimal conditions. Others have degraded over time. Environmental exposure, storage limitations, and earlier handling practices can all affect quality. This variability influences whether retesting is possible. Advances in forensic science have expanded what can be extracted from existing evidence. DNA analysis, in particular, has undergone significant development. Techniques that were not available in the 1980s or 1990s are now standard practice. Short tandem repeat, STR, analysis allows for the identification of individuals from very small biological samples. In some cases, even partial or degraded DNA can be used to generate investigative leads. According to the National Institute of Justice, these advancements have contributed to the resolution of cases that had remained unsolved for decades. However, not all evidence yields results. Some samples are too limited. Others have been contaminated. In certain instances, the original collection methods did not prioritize preservation for future testing, as the technology did not yet exist. This creates a boundary, a point beyond which analysis cannot proceed. In addition to DNA, other forensic disciplines play a role. Fingerprint analysis, ballistic comparison, and digital reconstruction are routinely applied in case reviews. Each method has its own standards, limitations, and evidentiary value. Ballistic evidence, for example, can be re-examined using updated databases that compare markings on recovered bullets and casings. These databases allow investigators to identify potential links between separate incidents. But a match is not always definitive. It must be interpreted within the broader context of the case. Digital evidence has introduced another layer. In more recent cases, data from mobile devices, surveillance systems, and online activity can provide timelines and associations. For older cases, this type of evidence is often absent. The investigative record is therefore shaped by the technology available at the time. In laboratories, the process is controlled and incremental. Evidence is not handled continuously. It is accessed when required. Requests for analysis are submitted through formal channels. Prioritization is based on active investigations, court deadlines, and available resources. This means that some evidence remains in storage for extended periods, not because it is irrelevant, but because there is no immediate procedural trigger for re-examination. The backlog of untested evidence has been documented in multiple jurisdictions. Efforts to address this backlog have been supported by federal initiatives, including funding programs administered by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. These programs aim to reduce delays and expand testing capacity. Progress has been reported, but the issue has not been fully resolved. Each piece of evidence represents a fixed point in time, a moment that has been preserved. But interpretation depends on context, and context can change. In some cases, new information leads investigators to revisit previously collected materials. A name emerges. A location becomes relevant. A connection is identified. At that point, evidence that has remained untouched can become central again. Inside correctional facilities, this process can intersect with individuals already serving sentences. If new forensic results suggest a link to an unsolved case, investigators may seek interviews, records, or additional samples. These procedures are governed by legal standards. Consent, warrants, and court orders may be required, depending on the circumstances. Each action is documented. Each result is reviewed. There are also cases where forensic reanalysis has led to the exclusion of previously identified suspects. Post-conviction DNA testing has resulted in exonerations, as documented by organizations such as the Innocence Project. These outcomes highlight both the potential and the limitations of earlier investigative methods. They also demonstrate the importance of preserving evidence over time. Back in the laboratory, the environment remains unchanged. Controlled temperature, regulated access, documented procedures. The work is precise, repetitive, and often slow. There are no immediate conclusions, only results that require interpretation, and interpretation that must align with established standards. For many unsolved cases, the evidence still exists. Stored, cataloged, waiting, not inactive, but not resolved. It remains part of a system that depends on timing, technology, and verification. Until those elements align, the evidence does not speak. It remains where it was placed, preserved for a future that may or may not arrive. Interviews behind controlled doors. Within correctional facilities, interviews are not informal. They are scheduled, documented, and conducted under controlled conditions. When investigators seek information related to unresolved criminal cases, access to incarcerated individuals follows a defined process. Requests are submitted through institutional channels. Approvals are required from facility administration. Security protocols determine the location, duration, and conditions of the interview. These interactions often take place in designated rooms like this one. Neutral spaces. Monitored. Recorded. The purpose is clarity. Every statement must be preserved accurately. Every exchange must be accountable. Law enforcement agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation and local departments, conduct these interviews as part of ongoing or reopened investigations. The individuals being interviewed may be serving sentences for unrelated offenses. They may be witnesses. They may be considered persons of interest, or they may have come forward voluntarily. In each case, the context is documented. Participation in these interviews can involve legal considerations. Depending on the circumstances, individuals may have legal representation present or may be advised of their rights prior to questioning. Statements are recorded using audio or video equipment. Transcripts are produced. These records become part of the investigative file. There are no assumptions made without corroboration. Information provided during interviews must be evaluated against existing evidence. Details are compared. Timelines are checked. Physical evidence is reviewed in relation to the statements. This process is methodical. It is designed to filter accuracy from inconsistency. In some documented cases, interviews conducted within correctional facilities have contributed to the resolution of cold cases. New details have led investigators to previously unidentified suspects. In other instances, the information has not been substantiated. Investigators are trained to assess credibility based on verifiable facts, not assertions. Motivations for providing information are considered, but not assumed. The environment itself influences the process. Correctional facilities operate under strict rules governing movement and communication. Inmates do not control their schedules. They do not choose the timing or location of interviews. They are escorted to and from the room by staff. Interactions are observed. Time is limited. These factors shape how information is exchanged. There is also a documented phenomenon of delayed disclosure. In some cases, individuals have provided information about crimes years after the events occurred. Reasons for this delay are not always clear in the record. What is documented is the timing. Statements given long after an incident require careful verification. Memory can degrade. Details can shift. Investigators account for this by focusing on elements that can be independently confirmed. Physical evidence, documented timelines, corroborating testimony. Within the justice system, there are also safeguards against unreliable statements. Courts evaluate the admissibility of confessions and witness accounts based on established legal standards. This includes examining the conditions under which statements were made, whether proper procedures were followed, whether the information aligns with known facts. These determinations are reflected in court rulings and legal opinions. Not all interviews lead to formal action. Many are conducted as part of exploratory phases of investigation. Information is collected, reviewed, and, in some cases, set aside. The record reflects both pursued and unpursued leads. Nothing is removed. Everything is documented. In correctional settings, communication between inmates is also regulated. Opportunities to share information informally are limited. This can affect how and when individuals choose to disclose what they know. Institutional policies are designed to maintain order and security. They are not structured to facilitate open exchange of information. This creates an environment where disclosures, when they occur, are often directed through formal channels. Back in the interview room, the structure remains unchanged. The table, the chairs, the recording device. Each element serves a function. There is no flexibility in layout, no variation in procedure. The process is consistent across cases. Questions are asked, answers are given, records are created, and then reviewed. For unsolved cases, these interviews represent one of the few points where new human input can enter an otherwise static record. They introduce variables, details that were not previously documented, possibilities that require examination. But they do not resolve cases on their own. They must align with evidence. They must withstand scrutiny. They must be verified. Until then, they remain part of the file. Another entry. Another attempt to move from uncertainty toward confirmation. And like the evidence stored in laboratories and the files maintained in records rooms, these interviews exist within a system defined by process, not outcome. They contribute to an ongoing effort. One that continues without guarantee of resolution. One that depends on accuracy, consistency, and time. Inside this room, the conversation ends when the recording stops. But the case does not. It returns to the file, where it remains open. The waiting continues. Across the United States, unsolved crime cases remain active within multiple systems. They exist simultaneously in police records rooms, forensic laboratories, and correctional facilities. Each element, the evidence, the files, the interviews, represents a fixed point in time, meticulously preserved, methodically maintained, and carefully reviewed. Nothing moves faster than procedure. Nothing is forgotten, but resolution is not guaranteed. For families of victims, for investigators, for incarcerated individuals connected to these cases, waiting becomes a constant condition. Time passes, sometimes years or decades, with answers arriving only occasionally and often incompletely. The structures of justice, of incarceration, and of investigation are designed to maintain order, document fact, and preserve integrity. But within that order, uncertainty persists. Some questions will be answered. Others may remain suspended indefinitely. The files remain open, the evidence preserved, and the interviews recorded. The cases wait, as does the passage of time. These are the unsolved mysteries. They are not stories for entertainment. They are real events, recorded in official documents, verified reports, and legal records. They continue to unfold quietly in offices, labs, and prison cells across the country. As you reflect on these cases, consider the systems that hold them in balance. Systems of law, of evidence, and of human endurance. Some answers will arrive. Others will not. But every detail, every record, and every preserved piece of evidence contributes to the slow, deliberate work of truth. If this exploration resonated with you, consider sharing it with others. Comment your thoughts on the systems, the process, and the human stories behind the unsolved cases. Like the documentary if you value factual, investigative reporting, and subscribe to stay informed as we continue to examine the realities of crime, justice, and incarceration in America. The waiting continues, but the record remains.